Let's go to Mike McAllister, our friend.
We starting him with football or basketball?
I want to ask Mike, what's the most superhuman thing you've ever seen Chance Westry do?
I've seen Chance Westry do?
Yes. Stop a train?
I don't know.
Stop a train? Race a bullet? Nothing like that?
No, I think I saw him leap tall buildings in a single bound.
Oh, very impressive. I saw him ride a stationary bike once. It was crazy.
That's unbelievable. I'd start him just based on that.
All right, I guess we're starting with
You can
basketball.
throw everyone. I'm done being a jerk.
You brought up basketball. We can start basketball. What do you make of the two games we saw down at the Barclays Center? Obviously an improvement, but they come back 0-2. What do you take away from it? More positives or negatives?
I take away more positives as far as how I think this team can grow and get better at some of the things it struggled at during the first three games, especially on the defensive end. I actually thought they played pretty good defense, above average defense in these two games. They were better than anybody has been against Trey Johnson of Texas. He's a superstar stud, and I'm not sure he's going to have a worse shooting day than what he did against Syracuse. And, maybe some of that is just having an off day, but I really thought that Syracuse was extremely physical with him and really kind of got into his head a little bit, and that caused him to start forcing things. And that tells you, I think, what this team can be defensively. Now, the key for me is I want to see that against everybody. If they play defense like that against Cornell on Wednesday, they should blow that team out and beat them comfortably. No more of the stuff that we saw against Youngstown State, Lemoyne, et cetera. Because if you revert back to that on the defensive end, then it looks like those two games down in Brooklyn were kind of an anomaly as opposed to this team actually getting better on that end. The downside is there's still some struggles shooting from the outside a little bit. They go cold for stretches, and they didn't get a win. If you came back at least 1-1, I think you'd feel really good based on what you saw. The fact that you're 0-2, and when you look at the rest of the schedule, they basically have the Maryland game, the Georgetown game, and the Tennessee game, and it feels like they might have to win two of those to kind of get an impressive non-conference win, a couple of decent non-conference wins on their resume going into conference play. And then you look at the way the rest of the conference has performed, and outside of Duke and North Carolina, there's not much there, I think, that's going to really help your NCAA tournament resume. So it's unfortunate Syracuse couldn't get one of those down there, but I think we saw enough that you think this team could win enough games to get in the tournament conversation.
Along those lines, I know they've got Cornell next, but after that, they've got Tennessee and Notre Dame, and Paulie likes to say that it's getting late early. How important is it to win one of those games, Tennessee, Notre Dame, and if they don't, how much trouble would you think that this team is in at that point?
Well, I think Notre Dame just lost. They just lose to Elon. Is that who they just lost to somebody in the non-conference that was a non-power team that wasn't very highly regarded. So I don't think Notre Dame's going to be much of anything that's going to be a resume builder, but it could be something that could be that hurts your resume down the line.
Road game in conference, I guess, is why I was referring to it.
Yeah, it's in conference and those types of things. But, I agree with you. They have to win at least one for sure. If you beat Tennessee but then lose to Notre Dame and go at it that way, does the Notre Dame loss kind of, take away from the Tennessee win? I don't know. But, if you're competitive against Tennessee and then you beat Notre Dame, your three best opponents, sure, you didn't win, but you were competitive against three pretty good teams that are expected to be in the tournament. I think that's encouraging, but at some point you have to get past encouraging and you have to get some wins on your resume that help you. So I would say you have to win at least one, and if you figure out a way to upset Tennessee at Tennessee, then I think that's something that's almost by itself could propel you into the tournament if you have a decent year in conference.
Yeah, Notre Dame 4-1. They did lose to Elon 84-77. They've got this really tough stretch coming up. They've got Rutgers, Houston, both are nationally ranked teams. Then they're at Georgia, and then they're home for Syracuse. So that's the next four games for Notre Dame. So we'll learn a lot about the Fighting Irish here over the next couple of weeks. Let's switch gears and talk some football now. And, Paulie and I were saying this UConn game, it was just kind of like, they just kind of like handled their business. There wasn't anything that really stood out. What stood out to you, if anything, from Saturday?
It was kind kind of another one of these games similar to the Cal game and the NC State game where it really felt like they were in complete control and won by maybe, 3-4 scores. But you look at the final score and it was only a one-score game. So kind of similar to both of those games and how it played out. But, I think it ultimately, regardless of the score, was kind of what we expected in that UConn had some success running the ball. There was really only 2 plays. The rest of the time they couldn't run it. And Syracuse moved the ball on them pretty easily and, left some points out there, but pretty much controlled the game from start to finish. So, like you said, kind of nothing, I think, too crazy to take away other than, it sets up a really big game on Saturday.
What about the play of Darrell Gill Jr.? I mean, I said earlier that, it felt like a breakout game for him. I mean, obviously he went for 177, and he was fantastic. Just a sophomore. Technically, he's got 3 years of eligibility left because his freshman year he only played in the 4 games. So he's got 3 years of eligibility after this. Do you see him? I mean, could he use this performance? I mean, no, he could use this performance. Do you see him using this performance as, maybe a step forward and a guy that they can, rely upon next year and beyond?
Yeah, I do. I mean, he was someone that during the spring we kept hearing really good things about as being, potentially the most consistent and explosive receiver during the spring. And we've kind of seen little flashes of that here and there this season. But, they've got some veteran guys in Pena and Meeks, et cetera, that have been ahead of him. But I think it tells you once those guys go away that he and some other guys have a lot of talent and can kind of pick up where those guys left off. And the nice thing about Gill is I think he's pretty versatile. I think he can line up in the slot. I think he can line up outside. He's kind of shown the ability to do both of those things. And that's, really good for whoever the quarterback is next year and whatever the offense looks like. But, yeah, I think very highly of him. I did coming into the season. I just wasn't sure how many reps he'd get. But, perhaps Trevor Pena not playing in the second half and then, being without a couple other guys and Zede Haynes missing a bunch of time this year has given him a chance, and he certainly took advantage of that on Saturday.
What about some recruiting news? I know you've got some recruiting news that you've been reporting within the last 24 hours. Bring us up to date on the latest from a football perspective.
They got a commitment from a 2026 defensive back out of California. Jackson Gates is his name. Syracuse is the first school to offer. A bunch of other Power 4 schools have been actively recruiting him, most notably in the Pac-12. But Syracuse was the first school to jump in and give an offer. He came and visited over the weekend and committed. Obviously, there's about a year until he's able to sign, so a long way to go. And if a bunch of those Pac-12 schools or schools out in California, the UCLAs and the USCs, if those schools start coming calling, is he going to reconsider things because of proximity? You never know those things, but good to get a commitment from someone who is 6'1" and a track star out in California, so a fast kid as well that Syracuse is looking to play corner. And then they received a commitment from an edge prospect, kind of a defensive end, outside linebacker type, D'Angelo Thompson, who plays at Northwestern High School in Miami down south. He was previously committed to Florida Atlantic. We know they got a bunch of stuff going on with looking for a new coach and a lot of drama there. So he started looking around and took an official visit this weekend, and that resulted in him deciding to commit. So that was good recruiting news for Syracuse, and they had a couple other kids on campus for official visits. Caleb Singleton, who is also from Florida, is a 3-star or a 4-star, depending on what service you're looking at, was previously committed to Rutgers. Florida was also after him pretty heavy. So he was up for an official visit. His visit, I think, technically doesn't end until later this afternoon. So he's one we're watching. And they had Trey Dudley, who is committed to James Madison currently as a running back. Syracuse has offered him as a linebacker. He took an official visit this weekend, too, so he's kind of weighing what he wants to do with his future with about a week and a half until signing day.
I think we all look at this season, regardless of what happens on Saturday, and we say, this was a successful year for Fran Brown, for the SU football program, so on and so forth. With that being said, though, how important would a win be? What would a win do, I guess, for this program if they're able to knock off Miami?
Well, I think it would make a statement that, first of all, everything we've talked about in November, as Steve, you and I talked about it, on the pregame show, I think going into, some of those games that they had won, 24 games in the last 22 years or something like that in November. Right. And they've already got 2 so far this year, so it would give you a third November win, which I think is important. You'd get to 9 wins, so it gives you a chance to get to double-digit wins with a bowl game. It would enhance your bowl resume to get you into a better bowl game even more. It would solidify that at worst you would tie for 4th place in the ACC, which I think would be a pretty good year one. And it would give you a marquee win. I think right now the marquee win is UNLV. Still kind of amazing to me that they're ranked ahead of Syracuse in the polls since Syracuse beat them head-to-head. And you look at who UNLV has beaten, and they really haven't beaten anybody of note. Their best resume wins, technically, are close games against Boise State and Syracuse, but not winning them. And then obviously beating Kansas, who's beaten some ranked teams lately. But either way, that's Syracuse's best win right now is the win at UNLV. This win would give you a win over a top 10 team, an in-conference team, and would get national headlines. And we know that Miami's going into it motivated because a win gets them into the ACC championship game. So I think it would say a lot about the direction of this program and how good this team is. Even if you're competitive and don't win, I still think it sends a similar message. If you get blown out, there's going to be some that say, well, you won 8 games because of the schedule. If you beat Miami or you're right there with Miami down the stretch of that game, I think it removes that narrative from being a conversation.
What are you expecting to see Saturday against the Hurricanes? Is it a close game?
I think so. I mean, there's 2 things here. One, I think Syracuse is a good football team. And when you have a top 10 team coming to your place to end your season, and you know that guys like Marlo Wax, Justin Barron, et cetera, this is their last game in the Dome, and Kyle McCord. Then you look at guys like Arande Gadsden, who I think most are expecting will at least test the pro waters, if not turn pro, and some other guys that could do the same thing. There should be a lot of motivation going into this game. So I would expect Syracuse to play well. And then looking at it from Miami, even though, like I said, they're going to be motivated, it means a lot to them as well for the ACC championship, the playoff, et cetera. They have played down to competition almost all year. I know if you look at the final score against Wake Forest last week, you say, oh, they blew Wake Forest out. That was a 1-score game going into the third quarter and really only about a 10-point game midway through the third quarter. And Wake Forest stinks, and that was at Miami. Duke had a lead on Miami late into the second half. There's a lot of teams that aren't all that good that have played Miami tough, that have been a lot closer than people think. Georgia Tech, which didn't have its starting quarterback for the whole game, they beat Miami. Syracuse beat that Georgia Tech team. So I think Syracuse can play with Miami. I think Miami has a history of playing down to its opponent. And even though I think Miami is the better team, if both teams play to their max capability, Miami would win. I expect this game to be competitive and be in doubt going into the fourth quarter.
Yeah, in case you're wondering, for our listeners out there, Miami an early double-digit favorite, 10.5, 11.5 in different places. So that's what Vegas thinks anyway about this one. 3:30 kick Saturday inside the Dome to close out the regular season. Mike, as always, we appreciate the time. I'll see you on the quad for that show, our final quad show of the year.
All right, look forward to it. Thanks, guys.
All right, Mike McAllister joining us here. We'll hit a timeout, our final timeout in hour number 1. Fran Brown coming up at the top of hour number 2, his weekly press conference. We'll bring it to you live at 1 o'clock. Paul.
Want to sweep the nation, Steve?
Sure.
We haven't done this in a while.
Okay.
All right. We got Cornell tickets. Maybe you get a chance to see Chance for the first time ever in a Syracuse uniform on the court.
Your chance is coming up next.
Yeah, 315-437-7644. If you'd like to play a little sweeping of the nation, we'll do a little Cornell famous alumni trivia.
Okay, let's do it. We'll do that on the other side. And then Fran Brown coming up at 1 o'clock. Back after this on ESPN Radio.